2 foreign girls, buried somewhere in the hills, on the orders of Jeffrey, Madam G. That is what the email said, written in November 2019, by someone who claimed to be a former employee at the ranch, someone who said he had 7 videos, including footage of Epstein with a minor, someone who forwarded that email to an Albuquerque radio host named Eddie Aragon, who forwarded it to the FBI, and then nothing. The FBI received that email in November 2019. They had the tip. They had the sender's identity. They had a claim of 7 videos of abuse. They searched Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. They searched his Palm Beach mansion. They searched Little St. James, his private island in the Caribbean. They did not search Zorro Ranch. Not in 2019, not in 2020, not in 2021, not in 2022, not in 2023, not in 2020, not in 2020. For 6 years, that email sat in an FBI file, unacted upon, buried. The same word used in the email about the... On March 9, 2026, New Mexico investigators walked onto Zorro Ranch for the first time in history, 7 years after Jeffrey Epstein died in a federal prison, 6 years after the FBI received a tip about 2 bodies buried in the hills of that property. And as of today, March 17, 2026, a new tipster has come forward claiming to have seen grave-like plots on the grounds with their own eyes and sent photographs to state lawmakers. This is that. Before we examine every layer of what happened at Zorro Ranch, what the FBI knew and chose not to act on, what the 3 million documents released in January 2026 revealed, what Clinton said under oath, what happened when Prince Andrew was arrested, and what is happening on that ranch right now as you watch this video, make sure you are subscribed and hit that notification. This channel follows cases like this from the first document to the final search, and this search has just begun. Jeffrey Epstein built his life around one principle: access. Access to money, access to power, access to people who could protect him, and access to children. He was born on January 20th, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. Working-class family, small neighborhood on Coney Island. His father worked for the New York City Parks Department. No inherited wealth, no connections, no doors already open. What he had was a brain that worked differently from everyone around him, exceptional at mathematics, genuinely, unusually gifted, and alongside that mathematical mind, something that would prove even more valuable. He could read people. He could walk into a room full of powerful, wealthy, guarded individuals, and within minutes understand exactly what each of them wanted, what they feared, and what would make them trust him. At 18, he dropped out of college and started teaching math at the Dalton School, one of the most elite private schools in New York City. His students were the children of executives, politicians, celebrities, financiers, the children of people who ran things. And it was at Dalton that he made the one connection that changed everything. The father of one of his students was Alan Greenberg, an executive at Bear Stearns, one of the most powerful investment banks on Wall Street. Greenberg liked Epstein. He hired him. And just like that, the kid from Brooklyn, who never finished college, walked straight into the center of American financial. He was 21 years old. Within a few years, Epstein had positioned himself not just as a trader, as something more. He worked with ultra-high net worth clients, billionaire people who needed absolute discretion. He was brilliant at it, and he understood something that his colleagues didn't fully grasp, that in the world of extreme wealth, the real currency isn't money. Secret. His most significant client relationship was with a man named Les Wexner, founder of L Brands, Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, one of the wealthiest men in America. For reasons that have never been fully explained, Wexner gave Epstein something that financial advisors almost never receive: full power of attorney over his entire fortune. Through that relationship, Epstein obtained a 71-room townhouse on East 71st Street in Manhattan, the largest private residence in New York City. When federal agents searched that mansion after Epstein's 2019 arrest, they found something in the entrance: photographs, floor to ceiling, hundreds of surveillance-style images of powerful, famous, recognizable, and private, unguarded moments. That was Epstein's real business model. Not finance, not philanthropy. Leverage. Carefully constructed, meticulously maintained leverage over the people who could either destroy him or protect him. By the late 1990s, Epstein owned 5 properties: the Manhattan Mansion, a beachfront estate in Palm Beach, Florida, a 7-story townhouse in Paris, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands known as Little St. James, and the one that has received the least scrutiny of all. Until now, Zorro Ranch, 10,000 acres of high desert in Stanley, New Mexico, 30 miles south of Santa Fe, a 26,000-square-foot mansion on a hilltop, a private airstrip, a helipad, a 7-bay heated garage, a firehouse, ranch office, and more than 1,200 acres of adjacent state land that Epstein leased for what he claimed was livestock grazing. Land that the New Mexico State Land Office would later cancel in 2019, concluding it had been obtained through illegitimate means and was not being used for ranching. Land that officials said was used to protect the privacy of Epstein and his co-conspirator. Epstein purchased Zorro Ranch in 1990 from former Democratic Governor Bruce King. He owned it for nearly 30 years. And for nearly 30 years, girls were brought there. Girls without much money. Girls who needed help with college, career. Flown in from across the country to what felt, at first, like an exclusive resort. They rode horses across a mesa dotted with ancient rock carving. They posed for photographs at the mansion. They hiked, swam, shopped, watched movies. A wealthy older man was paying attention, asking about their goals, offering advice, handing them cash. And then the trips turned dark. Annie Farmer was 16 years old when she was brought to Zorro Ranch in 1996. She testified at Ghislaine Maxwell's 2021 federal trial that Maxwell groped her and that Epstein assaulted her at the property. A woman identified only as Jane testified she was flown to the ranch at age 14. She described being forced to participate in what she called orgy. Virginia Giuffre said she was ordered to have sex with Epstein and other men at the ranch. Chante Davies said she was raped there at least twice. Rachel Benavidez, a massage therapist abused at the ranch during visits beginning in 2000, said in a statement this month that she asks the FBI and local law enforcement to continue uncovering the evil abuse and trafficking that took place at Zorro Ranch, and to hold all those involved who turned a blind eye fully accountable. At least 10 women and girls have described being abused at Zorro Ranch. And yet, when Epstein was arrested in July 2019 on federal sex trafficking, the FBI searched his Manhattan townhouse. They searched Palm Beach. They searched Little St. James. They did not search Zorro Ranch. There is no public evidence that federal authorities ever searched Zorro Ranch after Epstein's death. Not once. And the reason that detail matters so much right now is what was buried inside the FBI's own files that the public did not know existed until January 30th, 2026. On November 19th, 2025, President Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency. On January 30th, 2026, the Department of Justice released approximately 3 million pages of previously sealed documents related to the Epstein investigation. 3 million pages. Buried inside those 3 million pages were 2 communications from 2019, 2 documents the FBI had received, filed away, and never acted on. The first was an anonymous email sent to Eddie Aragon, a radio host in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in November 2019. The sender claimed to be a former employee at Zorro Ranch. The email said the following: "Did you know somewhere in the hills outside the Zorro, 2 foreign girls were buried on the orders of Jeffrey and Madam G. Both died by strangulation during rough, fetish sex." Madam G is understood to refer to Ghislaine Maxwell. The sender claimed to possess 7 videos taken from Epstein's home, including 19 minutes and 22 seconds of footage described as an underage girl sex video. The sender requested 1 Bitcoin in exchange for the information and the video. Aragon forwarded the email to the FBI. He also told the FBI he knew the sender's identity. The FBI received the email. They received the sender's identity. They filed it away. Eddie Aragon says he never heard from the FBI again. The second document was an email from a retired New Mexico State police officer. The officer flagged a suspicious barn on the Zorro Ranch property, a barn that appeared to contain a concealed incinerator. The FBI received that communication as well. Both communications, two separate tips, one claiming buried bodies, one flagging what appeared to be an incinerator, both received in 2019. Neither investigated 6 years. While the FBI searched every other known Epstein property, while prosecutors in New York built their case, while Ghislaine Maxwell was tried and convicted and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Zorro Ranch was never searched, not once, and here is the detail that makes this even harder to explain. When New Mexico's state attorney general tried to open an investigation into Epstein's activities at Zorro Ranch in 2019, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York asked them to close it. New Mexico closed the investigation at the request of federal prosecutors, who then never searched the ranch themselves. The state closed its case. The feds never opened theirs, and for 6 years, whatever is in those hills outside the Zorro sat undiscovered. On February 19, 2026, New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres reopened the criminal investigation into Zorro Ranch. He cited the revelations outlined in the previously sealed FBI files as warranting further examination. On March 8, 2026, hundreds of protesters gathered at the gates of the former Zorro Ranch on International Women's Day, demanding justice for Epstein's victim, demanding answers about what happened on that property, demanding to know why it took 6 years for anyone to look. On March 9, 2026, the New Mexico Department of Justice, the New Mexico State Police, and the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office walked onto Zorro Ranch for the first time, the first ever law enforcement search of the property. New Mexico officials ordered the current owners to stop all construction during the investigation. And today, March 17, 2026, Al Jazeera published a report that had not been previously reported anywhere. A member of the public, claiming to have broken into Zorro Ranch in 2020, sent photographs to state lawmakers. Photographs, the tipster said, showed plots on the ranch grounds that had been dug up, grave-like plots. The tipster's letter to lawmakers said, "I realize this might be illegal," referring to entering the property. But men like that don't deserve the protection of the law. The images have not been independently verified. State investigators are aware of them. The search continues. Zorro Ranch is now owned by Don Huffines, a Texas businessman and Republican candidate for state comptroller who purchased it from Epstein's estate in 2023. He renamed it San Rafael Ranch, after a saint associated with healing. He announced plans to turn it into a Christian retreat. His family has cooperated with the investigation. They gave investigators full access to the property. Whatever is on that ranch now belongs to a man who had nothing to do with what happened, but the ground does not change ownership. The hills do not change. And if there is anything buried in those hills, it has been there since before anyone thought. Now let's talk about what was happening everywhere else while Zorro Ranch was being ignored. In January 2026, 3 million documents, and what those documents showed about the people who surrounded Epstein is the other half of it. Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's plane at least 26 times. Epstein visited the Clinton White House 17 times. In February 2026, Clinton testified under oath before the House Oversight. He confirmed the 26 flights. Charitable work, he said. Humanitarian trips. He was asked about the 17 White House visits. He said he did not recall those specific interactions. He was asked about Virginia Giuffre's. He said he was never on the island. He was asked about a photograph of him in what appears to be a hot tub with a woman whose face was redacted. He said he did not know the woman. He said it was from a charitable trip to Brunei. He denied any sexual activity. He was asked about an Epstein email that said Clinton owed him favors. He said he had no idea what Epstein meant. He was asked about a secret FBI investigation into allegations connected to him. He said he had no knowledge. 4 words defined his testimony: "I did nothing wrong." On February 19, 2026, British police arrested Prince Andrew, son of Queen Elizabeth II, former Duke of York. He was taken into custody on suspicion of misconduct in public office, related to his relationship with Epstein. He was held for 10 hours. He was released. He remains under investigation. He was the first member of the British royal family to be arrested in 379 years. 379 years. On February 23, 2026, British politician Peter Mandelson, a former European Union Trade Commissioner and close ally of Tony Blair, was arrested outside his home, also for misconduct in public office. Also related to Epstein, he was released on bail. In January 2026, a Slovakian national security advisor resigned after his name appeared in the Epstein files. A Dubai-based businessman connected to Formula One governance resigned after emails in the files referenced in his exchanges with Epstein, a torture. These are the names that made the news. The files contain over 1,000 names in total. And Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said in January 2026, after the release of what the department called the final batch of documents, that new charges for anyone are unlikely. New charges are unlikely for anyone. After 3 million documents, after decades of abuse, after a secret deal in 2008 that buried a 60-count federal indictment, after a man died in a federal prison cell before he could be tried. New charges are unlikely. Now let's talk about that death, because nothing about what happened inside Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York on August 10, 2019, has ever been fully explained. Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell at 6:30 in the morning. He was pronounced dead at 7:53 a.m. The official ruling was suicide by hanging. He was 66 years old. He was awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking. He had been taken off suicide watch less than 2 weeks earlier, despite a prior incident in the same cell. The 2 guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes had both fallen asleep. Both were later charged with falsifying prison records. Neither has been convicted. The surveillance cameras outside his cell malfunctioned. The footage was unusable. The New York City medical examiner ruled the death a suicide. A pathologist hired by Epstein's brother disagreed. He said the injuries to Epstein's neck were more consistent with homicide than suicide. The Justice Department's Inspector General released a report in 2023 concluding that the Bureau of Prisons had made serious management failures, but did not conclude that the death was anything other than what the official ruling stated. The question of what happened inside that cell on the night of August 9th and the morning of August 10th, 2019, remains the most disputed element of this entire case. The people who were supposed to face accountability for what Epstein did to them had been waiting for a trial that would never happen. Ghislaine Maxwell is the only person who has been criminally convicted for what Epstein built and operated for more than 2 decades. She's serving 20 years in federal prison for sexual exploitation and trafficking of children. She has refused to name names beyond what was established at trial. She has appealed her conviction. The appeals have been denied. She is the only one. Virginia Roberts Giuffre spent 20 years fighting to change. She named names. She testified. She gave depositions. She filed lawsuits. She did everything the system asked of her and more. She died at 39 years old in April 20 without seeing a single person beyond Maxwell held criminally accountable. Behind every document in those 3 million pages, there is a person. A girl who was 14. A teenager who needed a few $100s. A young woman who was told she was lucky to be chosen by a powerful man. They were not lucky. They were children. They were failed by the man who abused them, by the prosecutors who made a secret deal to protect him, by the FBI that received a tip about buried bodies in New Mexico and filed it away for 6 years, by a prison system that couldn't keep him alive long enough to face trial, and by every person who flew on that plane and visited that island and visited that ranch and attended those parties and understood at some level, consciously or not, that something was wrong and said nothing. Now, let's examine what 3 working theories investigators and analysts have developed about the state of this case in 2026. The first theory is that the March 2026 search of Zorro Ranch will find physical evidence that changes the entire trajectory of the investigation. If the buried bodies tip is credible, if those grave-like plots photographed in 2020 contain what the tipster believes they contain, if the incinerator barn flagged by the retired state police officer yields forensic material, then New Mexico would have evidence of crimes beyond trafficking. Evidence that could force the federal government to reckon with what its own investigators chose not to examine. Evidence that could make new charges not just possible, but unavoidable. The second theory is that the search finds nothing conclusive, that 6 years of exposure to New Mexico's high desert climate have destroyed whatever physical evidence might have existed, that the incinerator was used to destroy evidence long before anyone came looking, that the bodies, if there were bodies, are gone, and that what the search produces is confirmation that something happened at Zorro Ranch, confirmation of crimes already known, confirmation that the FBI should have looked sooner, without the forensic foundation needed to charge anyone new. The third theory is the one nobody wants to say directly, that the 6-year delay was not negligent, that the FBI knew exactly what it was not looking for at Zorro Ranch, that the decision to close New Mexico's state investigation at the request of federal prosecutors was not coordination. It was protection. Protection for the names in those files. Protection for the network that Epstein spent 30 years constructing. Protection that outlasted Epstein himself, and that the search happening now, 6 years later, on a property has changed ownership and been renamed and is being converted into a Christian retreat, is designed to produce the appearance of accountability without the substance. Which theory is correct? That question cannot be answered today. What can be said today, with documentation from official sources, from court records, from the FBI's own files, is this. Epstein flew children to a remote ranch in New Mexico for almost 3 decades. At least 10 of them have described being abused. The FBI received a tip about buried bodies on that property in November 2019. They knew the sender's identity. They chose not to investigate. They searched every other Epstein property. They excluded this one. 6 years. New Mexico closed its own investigation in 2019 at the federal government's request, and the federal government never replaced it with one of its. The 3 million documents released in January 6 contained those buried tips, and within weeks of that release, a new tipster came forward with photographs of what appear to be grave-like plots on the property. The search is ongoing. The investigation is active. The Truth Commission established by New Mexico's legislature is meeting, and the ground at what used to be called Zorro Ranch is being examined for the first time by investigators who did not have the authority to look 6 years ago because the federal government told them to stop. Step back from the individual detail. Look at the whole shape of what has been documented. A man built a network of abuse that operated for 30 years. He built it with money, with access, with leverage over the most powerful people on earth. He abused children on 5 properties across 2 countries. He died in a federal prison cell under circumstances that have never been fully explained. The only person convicted for what he built is serving 20 years. His most prominent victim died at 39 without seeing justice. His former partner has refused to name the names the world is waiting to hear. 3 million documents were released in January 2026. They contained a 6-year-old tip about buried bodies that the FBI never investigated. They contained evidence of a network that included presidents and princes and billionaires and politicians across the political spectrum. And the investigators who are now searching that ranch in New Mexico are working on a property changed, being renamed, and is being converted into something new, while the hills outside remain exactly as they were, untouched until now. The New Mexico Department of Justice is accepting tips about Zorro Ranch at nmdoj.gov. The investigation is ongoing. The search continues. And the question that sits underneath all 3 million documents, underneath every deposition and every flight log and every testimony and every sealed file that took years to pry open, is the same question it has always: who knew? Who protected him? And what is buried in those hills? Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. This investigation is not finished. It is barely, and when New Mexico investigators release their findings from that, we will be the first to connect what they find to everything you have learned in this video. Leave your thoughts in the comment. Do you believe the FBI deliberately excluded Zorro Ranch from its investigation? Do you believe the 6-year delay was negligence or something more deliberate? And do you believe that what is buried in those hills will finally change the answer to the question that has defined this entire case since 2000? Whether the most powerful people on Earth can be held accountable for what they knew and what they did and what they chose to look away from. The victims deserve that answer. They have been waiting long enough.